Okay. For the record, hello everyone. I'm Philippe Blouin. Okay. So this head that you see here is Mr. Ryerson's head, coming from a statue at Ryerson University, named after this man who was responsible for advocating the creation of a residential school system, denominational schools, who designed the framework for Canada's residential school system. His head was, well, actually the statue in front of Ryerson University in Toronto was toppled and decapitated on June 6, 2021. So 5 days after the discoveries of 215 unmarked graves of children in Kamloops, British Columbia. And the head ended up in Rotinonshonni territory. Here we see this is 1492 land back lane, an occupation, a land reoccupation that started in July 2020 to oppose a residential project in lands, Rotinonshonni lands that we call the Haldimand Tract. Haldimand Tract, here you see a picture. Originally, this was a parcel that was bought from the Mississauga Nation and given to the Rotinonshonni or Iroquois Confederacy, who had to flee from the United States after the American War of Independence, because they sided with the British. And well, there was an order from George Washington to burn all Iroquois villages. That was the Sullivan expedition. So they were all driven away, except for some that sided with the Americans, Oneida, and some Seneca groups who remained in the United States, but most had to flee and escape to Canada through Niagara Falls back then. And they were granted this land, which originally was set to include 6 miles both sides of the Grand River in Ontario, close to Brantford. But over the years, settler encroachment ended up establishing cities that eventually became pretty big, settler cities: Waterloo, Kitchener, Cambridge, and Brantford. And well, that treaty has never been respected. So 1492 land back lane rests on this claim from the Rotinonshonni Confederacy to this right for all these lands 6 miles both sides of the river. And this 2020 reoccupation followed another land reoccupation in the same area, Caledonia, Ontario, for another residential project, housing project in 2008. And this reoccupation was named Ganunstatu, a word which is pretty interesting in Ganyangeha Mohawk language. It's a word that's used for any type of fight to protect the land, and it still names the land itself. And the site still exists, and it serves as a basis also for the people reoccupying 1492 land back lane. Ganunstatu is this other site, and it still has the old the half constructed houses on the site, and it's reoccupied. Ganunstatu actually means a land to defend, and actually it's derived from the word Anse non state, which means territory, but which literally means that something that you have to protect and respect, because the word itself, territory, comes from onanste, corn, the word for corn, which literally means that something that supports us and that you need to protect. So that definition and other definitions that I'll be using throughout this presentation come from my work on a book. We can talk about it afterwards. I won't talk about it too much here, but it's a book I've been working on for 5 years now with Rotinonshonni, and more precisely Genocide, meaning Mohawk, traditionalist who founded the Mohawk Warrior Society in the 70s, a group, Red Power group that was extremely important in putting Indigenous issues on the forefront. Was established in 1972, but the story is very little known except for the 1990 Oka crisis. But beforehand, there had been land reoccupations, notably in New York State, Ganyange, a land that was seized. It was a abandoned camp for rich for girls from rich families that was empty, and was reoccupied in 1974, and they ended up the warriors, Mohawk warriors, getting another land more closer to Plattsburgh, Minor Lake afterwards. Well, this book, actually, I did some work with some elders, and especially Digarundeke, an elder from Ganawage, who's known to speak the old Mohawk language. So to really have an etymological understanding of the meaning of words, and we worked on a Mohawk conceptual glossary, a lexicon that's going to be featured in this book.
We're going to interrupt, I just think I figured out the audio issue, so it might make it better. Sorry, I think we're getting the audio from there. Sorry to interrupt, I think I just figured out the.
Depends. I don't know why. Oh wait, I got one. Sorry. Okay.
I'm going to stop sharing for a second so that I can. Seconds, I figured out the audio, I think.
Change the mic there.
No. Yeah. Okay. Audio better?
Is it? Yeah.
Yeah, the audio should be better now. Okay. Back to sharing. Sorry, I just want your audio to be good.
Yeah, no, it's fine.
Okay.
Okay. And just a last point on for this discretion introductory discretion. Last point of actuality is that there's currently digging happening on the territory of Brantford, Ontario, next to the reservation of the Six Nation of the Grand River, which Ganyangeha people called it Oswego, that land. And this is the where it's happening, those digs in the Mohawk Institute, which was the first residential school founded in Canada in 1828. And that served as an example for other residential schools. It's also called the mush hole, many people say, because of the horrible oatmeal that was served there as part of experiments, nutritional experiments that were done on children there. Or some other people say it was called that way because there was a hole where children were put in isolation and where they often died, according to some testimonies. And actually, recent news revealed that the Canadian government and Ontario government are holding on to the records of what happened in the Mohawk Institute. So the community there, and the investigation is led by survivors and community members. They're asking for all files to be released, but it's something to follow. Okay, so that's done for the introduction. Let's go in the presentation proper, starting with a customary quote by Joseph François Lafitau, a French Jesuit, known also to be one of the first proto-ethnographers doing comparative ethnography, and who lived with the Iroquois as well. And just a quote from him: "It could be said that all their work, all their sweating, and all their trade comes back almost solely to doing honor to the dead." Time and again, ethnographic fieldwork requires blithely putting up with mockery. Although it often serves to disguise anthropologists' thirst for data into inoffensive, ludicrous goofiness, some taunts can bring the researchers rather than their informants to yield up their secrets. One such remark from an Anishinaabe friend once left me baffled. I was helping to build a wigwam for a land-based language and culture camp in La Vérendrye Wildlife Reserve, a 5-hour drive north from Montreal. And as my friend saw me struggling to dig a hole to put a pole in this wigwam, which you see here, where they had language courses and traditional culture courses, my friend tried to cheer me up. "Come on, keep digging," she said. "You'll find the bones of your ancestors." It was genuinely funny, and I joined in the laughter. But it obviously hinted at the other darker side of the coin, the violence and dehumanization to which French settlers consistently subjected Anishinaabe people throughout history. As it got dark and we sat by the fire, my friend's mother, a respected kukum whose traditional knowledge is invaluable to her community, took it upon herself to recount the trauma she experienced and witnessed as a child attending a French Catholic residential school. This happened in 2018, as the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada had just coined the term cultural genocide as a conclusion to their report to describe how the residential school system in place between the 1870s and the 1990s endeavored to kill the Indian in the child by separating Indigenous children from their parents and punishing them for speaking the language and practicing the culture. Yet survivors had long described these schools as not merely culturally genocidal, but as outright concentration camps, intentionally murdering Native children whose bodies were allegedly buried close by. Dismissed as hearsay, the truth of genocide, plain and simple, became irrefutable in June 2021, when a grassroots Indigenous team, investigation team, uncovered 215 unmarked graves next to the Telnloops Te Sekwepeng territory in Kamloops, as we call it, British Columbia, launching a nationwide search for other mass graves. As of October 2021, the remains of 1,308 Indigenous children had been discovered in 5 different sites, and with at least 129 official residential school facilities remaining to be investigated, we can expect the total count of deaths to be staggering. When truth is not so much a secret as a public secret, Michael Taussig, anthropologist, recommends pondering these words from Jewish philosopher Walter Benjamin, whose body was itself tossed in an unmarked fossa communale near the French border of fascist Spain in 1940, while he was trying to escape the Nazis. Truth, this is Benjamin's word, truth is not a matter of exposure destroys a secret, but a revelation which does justice to it. By relaying Indigenous conceptions of restorative justice, this presentation seeks to provide settlers with an understanding of restitution that meets the scope and scale of the extermination. If only survivors can determine the face of justice, the burden of repair is on the perpetrators alone and their hires. As Tuscarora writer Alicia Elliott reminds us, the genocide was conducted on behalf of every non-Indigenous family who proudly call themselves Canadians, with the result that this entire country is haunted by the violence. This is not a situation where settlers could simply wish that they were dead in their victims' stead. According to Avery F. Gordon, to be haunted is to be tied to historical and social effects, thus deactivating the reversibility of the if you were me and if I were you logic. The genocide could not have gone the other way, as it targeted the inconvertible minds and bodies of the original peoples alone. I argue that this has been the case not only because Indigenous peoples have consistently stood in the way of the colonial state, but because their ways of living necessarily entail its destitution. And this is the case because Indigenous constitutions are themselves based on restituting power to a people yet to come, in such a way that destitution, instead of a vanishing moment giving way to new constituent powers, is the constituent power itself. When I mention destitution here, it's less obvious in English. It's a concept that comes from Mario Tronti and Giorgio Agamben, especially, and used in French. Puissance destituante, already it's the term puissance, which is distinguished from pouvoir, which is not power in the sense of wielding power, but more in the sense of a potency, of a power that's not actualized. And destitution in French means to depose. So it's more this idea than to be destitute or simply poor. But it's becoming like a buzzword in certain, it's starting to be out there in different journals in anthropology as well. Destituent power, Agamben's concept. In the wake of the findings, Prime Minister Trudeau could no longer avoid using the word genocide without narrowing it down to a cultural one. This admission exposed the state of Canada to prosecution for crimes against humanity before the International Court of Justice. The Canadian government also recognized the authority of First Nations, that is the authority of First Nations in conducting further investigations. Yet Trudeau immediately proceeded to appoint an Inuit woman, Marie Simon, as the new Governor General representing the Queen, and immediately after announced premature elections where unmarked graves were poised not to be mentioned. Mi'kmaq lawyer and who's also the chair of Indigenous governance at Ryerson University, Pamela Palmater, said that the headline coverage of the residential school graves was totally pushed to the wayside by the elections. And she also recalled that the elections before had a similar pattern, as they immediately followed the national inquiry into murdered and missing Indigenous women who had just been released and found Canada guilty of genocide. Refacing colonial institutions with Indigenous figures, while no individual whatsoever is prosecuted for crimes against humanity, is pretty much the same as propagating institutional land acknowledgements, while the continent and its resources stay largely under the control of colonial occupiers. The public secret is destroyed by way of being partially shown, as if it had been metaphorically resolved. A closer look suggests that acknowledging Indigenous contributions to colonial institutions often serve the interests of the latter, were thus bestowed with legitimacy that is siphoned from their historical victims. Ghanaian Gehaga scholar Kaitlin Debicki notes that decolonization has come to be used as a metaphor for institutional renewal rather than removal. Abandoning hopes that symbolic reconciliation may precede material restitution requires doing away with metaphorical understandings of decolonial repair. And to demetaphorize decolonization, as Tuck and Yang suggest, implies relinquishing settler futurity, abandoning the hope that settlers may one day be commensurable to native peoples. Unmetaphorically redeeming the past thus requires restituting futurity to the indigenous present by dismantling the colonial present, which the genocide sought to establish. The tendency to see indigenous thought as unrealistic, spiritualistic metaphors is deeply rooted in colonial perception, dating back to early colonists' interpretation of indigenous oratory imagery as based upon the insufficiency of abstract words in their languages and intellectual traditions, to quote Ghanaian Gehaga historian Deborah Dockstader. According to Dockstader, to be considered as metaphors, indigenous verbal images had to previously be extracted from the other sets of figures that they were related to. Within the Rotinonshonni Confederacy, for instance, family-based terminologies incorporate and repeat themselves in the organization of clans and larger groups of people such as moieties, nations, and the Confederacy of Nations. This both centripetal and centrifugal analogic flow, to use Roy Wagner's term, analogic flow of kinship relates relations to other relations in such a way that their continuity exceeds metaphorical delimitation, thus presenting, to quote Dockstader, ideas and concepts organically, not as linear segmented arguments. That this organic continuity exceeds metaphor is what early colonial diplomats had such a hard time understanding when they insisted, for instance, that their indigenous allies use the term father when addressing European monarchs and their representatives, failing to understand that fatherhood did not imply coercive authority in Rotinonshonni culture, but rather a responsibility to provide wealth and distribute wealth. Understanding this would have required to associate indigenous familial terminology not only with larger concentric social-political circles, but also with animal and cosmological entities, as the male principle, at least in Rotinonshonni culture, is socially associated with departing to the forest for war and hunting, and cosmologically associated with off-ground celestial bodies such as the sun and stars, procuring light and warmth to a fundamentally feminine Mother Earth. Mother Earth and her plant daughters and the women who themselves are in charge of decisions within the village clearing. This is something that is understood, that's evidenced by what may be the most staple element of non-Christian Rotinonshonni spirituality, to use a word that perhaps they wouldn't even accept it as spiritual, but it's the Ohonton Si Kariwatekwa, the Thanksgiving address, which means literally the words that come before all matters. In any type of meeting, political, ceremonial, these words that they can last for 10 minutes, they can last for an hour and a half. These words give thanks to all the elements of creation, and using terms where these elements of creation, the waters, the sun, the stars, the plants, are all associated with family. Like here we see the three sisters, corn, squash, and bean, that grow together, that constituted the basis, you know, of Rotinonshonni farming. And actually, they're called three. They're actually called three little sisters because they're plants that need to be cultivated, whereas plants that grow by themselves, raspberries, wild strawberries, are called older sisters, since they take care of themselves. And actually, all plants are of female gender because they are born from Mother Earth, whereas, as I said, the men are associated with the stars and sun. Yet this analogic flow of kinship is also continuous and holistic. No, sorry. If this flow of kinship, where everything appears as family, every element of nature beyond the human, if this kinship is continuous and holistic, it still proceeds and works through distinctions and contrasts. Far from flattening differences, the multiplication of analogies widens the basis for their distinction. By approaching these unbound analogous distinctions as piecemeal metaphors, colonizers both ignored their outer continuity and their inner discontinuity, which allowed indigenous cosmopolitical thought to ensure that distinct groups remained distinct and yet had some basis for unity and connection among them into a larger spatial and social unit, to quote Dockstader again. A perfect illustration of this can be found in the Rotinonshonni protocol for relationships with settlers, the Tehiohate or Two Row Wampum, which is also the main object of my PhD research. Actually, we're used to the word wampum, but in Ghanaian Geha language, they rather use the word gayuni, which where uni means something that has been made. But another definition of gayuni is that it has been extended out, and the word Rotinonshonni has also this contains this root, and actually means their houses are extended out. So it's again this kinship that is extended outside of the family to the five nations of the Rotinonshonni. Wampum belts, for those who don't know already, were made from mainly quahog shells that were harvested in around Long Island, and we use the word belt, but they have different shapes and forms, and they were used as a material device that captured messages and agreements that were passed on, and can be understood as the equivalent of Rotinonshonni equivalent of law for Western peoples. The Two Row Wampum itself, the Tehiohate, is dated back by Rotinonshonni oral tradition to an early 17th century agreement with Dutch settlers, the first settlers which they encountered, and was later expanded to the French and English peoples. It displays two purple rows on a white background, symbolizing a river where the original people's canoe and the settler's ship are said to sail side by side, keeping their culture and ways of life within their own vessel. As an alliance belt, it suggests that parties can only move in the same direction, provided that they remain parallel and refrain from crossing each other's path. Ganengehaga elders told me that this paradoxical conception of alliance through separation, which precludes both cultural appropriation on which would be to try to bring back the other vessel in your own, and assimilation policies. Actually, this conception of alliance through separation applies not only to relationship with settlers, but between, in between and amongst any and all social groups, indigenous or not, and even beyond to non-human nations, ensuring their mutual respect in diplomatic relationships. With its intricate system of checks and balances, which allegedly inspired the first drafts of the Constitution of the United States, the pre-colonial constitution of the Rotinonshonni Confederacy, the Gayanrigoa, which is often translated as the great law of peace, but there's nothing that it really has nothing to do with law in the coercive Western sense of the term. The Gayanrigoa displays a similar care for respecting the mutual autonomy and balancing, reciprocally balancing power between clans and nations, as a Two Row Wampum provides for relationships with settler nations. If the Gayanrigoa provides in this respect a prime example of a destituent constitution, European colonizers rather tended to view alliance as a subsumption of the weaker element into the stronger power. In this respect, institutional refacing and acknowledgement policies only seem to transgress the Two Row Wampum the other way around, adding cultural appropriation to the failed attempts at assimilating indigenous people into the European role. This is here the Two Row Wampum that's being shown to officers from the OPP, Ontario Provincial Police, and during the train blockades and support for the Wet'suwet'en's struggle against the pipeline. Wet'suwet'en people of the West Coast, and this was done directly on the tracks in Tyendinaga Mohawk community in Ontario, and the police were pretty baffled to be welcome with this presentation of the wampum, but it's really the first element that will be presented in the Two Row Wampum in any type of encounter with the settlers. Rotinonshonni traditionalists often stress that the ethics embodied by the Two Row Wampum and the Gayanrigoa is unmetaphorical because it is grounded in empirical relations between natural beings. Refraining from positing a transcendental instance, be it spiritual, religious, or lay, legal. In a sense, translating the Gayanrigoa as a great law of peace is obviously treacherous, as it rather appears to provide an ethical guideline for ways of living that make law unnecessary. However, metaphorical translations of indigenous concepts may be unavoidable, as European languages may be structurally incapable of transporting the extensive network of relations between relations that compose the meaning of indigenous symbolism. And they might only be able to connect isolated bits with other isolated bits. Applying the Two Row Wampum to the incommensurability of translation might mean that to non-indigenous eyes, all indigenous ideas seem metaphorical. But from the native point of view, where cultural empiricism is said to have prevailed. Well, many elders say that their tradition is empiricist, you know, it refrains from positing in transcendental instances. Debicki, Ghanaian scholar Kathleen Debicki, suggests that metaphors are rather to native eyes, they're rather perceived as metonymies. What does this mean? By contrast with metaphors, which extract and compare specific qualities between material beings, metonymies appear once analogies are multiplied to the point of encompassing the whole, comprising all relations. This I didn't explain, but it's the Diga Nawida epic where the foundation of the Iroquois Confederacy, or the Rotinonshonni Confederacy. Well, I'll pass on that. This is the notion of all relations that exist in many North American indigenous languages. Agwe Tewa Da Tenu is in Ghanaian Geha language. Given they're both continuous and given they're both continuous and contrasted, holistic and plural nature, Debicki explains that metonymies relate contiguous elements in such a way that neither one is allowed to completely depart from the other, as they are tied together but remain autonomous. The Two Row Wampum manifestly epitomizes this metaminic diplomacy, where metonymically related beings are allies moving in the same direction by remaining separate. To demetaphorize decolonization, one can thus think of the most common example of a metonym, which is to drink a cup or to eat a dish, where the container is a shortcut to the contained. If decolonization points to the container, the destitution of settler colonization, its real significance lies in all the relations it contains, the restitution of the unsettled. All the relations contained within the decolonial metonymy are empirical. They are not only grounded, they are in and of the ground. To get at the gist of what decolonial destitution requires to restitute, and to get back to the horrible findings under the grounds of residential schools, we can consider the indigenous entities which settler colonial epistemology is the least likely to acknowledge as empirical, that is, ghosts or spirits. What does it mean to take as metonymies rather than metaphors the idea that Canada is a haunted cemetery where the restless spirits of lost children yearn to be discovered in the grounds watched over by the ancestor spirits? Following the accidental discovery of ancient indigenous bones near Toronto in 2005 during excavations for roadwork, which ended up obstructing the environmentally harmful development project that the work was being done for, anthropologist Victoria Freeman was repeatedly told by indigenous activists in Toronto that bones come up for a reason. Similarly, when the children rumored to be buried near residential schools were finally discovered, Ghanaian Gehaga writer Gantineta Rodiscariwage concluded that Mother Earth had herself pushed her dead children to the surface as a testimony to the fact that creation was avenging the genocide. Gantineta then explained that the earth uncovered the children in response to what had been the underlying intention of residential schools to thoroughly depopulate indigenous territories to grab their lands and resources. This reading is supported by some famous quotes, notably one by Duncan Campbell Scott, who ran the residential school system at its peak between 1913 and 1932. Scott said, "I want to get rid of the Indian problem. Our object is to continue until there is not a single Indian in Canada that has not been absorbed into the body politic, and there is no Indian question and no Indian department. In 1889, Alexander Sutherland, the superintendent for the Methodist Church, put it even more bluntly: make the savage a Christian and he will settle peacefully on reserves. Teach him the scriptures and he will give up his claim to the land that we require. It was to grab indigenous lands that indigenous minds, and in the case of failure, their bodies, had to be erased. For a great part of its land, save for the exception of the lands that were part of the James Bay hydroelectric complex and the agreement, and the 11 numbered treaties signed with chiefs in the prairies at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century, Canada is yet to prove that it has legal title to its own land, its capital and metropolises included. The right of conquest argument, which the Canadian courts sometimes resort to, is rather flaky, given that Indigenous peoples were never defeated in a duly declared war, being rather allies of the British. This leaves Pope Alexander VI 1493 a papal bull, Inter Cetera, which established the doctrine of discovery by granting Spain and Portugal the right to annex any territory not already controlled by a Christian monarch, as perhaps the sole justification left for settler colonial occupation. In addition, another latter properly British legal justification of colonial appropriation, land appropriation, was also based on John Locke's doctrine of improvement, where provided that each man possesses his own body, Locke stated that whatsoever then he removes out of the state that nature hath provided and left it in, he hath mixed his labor with and joined to it something that is his own, and thereby makes it his property. Yet there's a grain of truth in John Locke's idea, as proves a contemporary ongoing resistance to development. Kanien'kehá:ka elders explain that the Two Row Wampum also involved that the Europeans would remain in the water. It granted them a right to remain in the water, and is the same right that the Indigenous had by staying in their canoe. The idea was to leave other forms of life to lead their own ways of life by refraining from superimposing infrastructures that made those other ways of life impossible. There's also, furthermore, a grain of truth in Alexander VI, Pope Alexander VI idea that Indigenous peoples could not be considered as landowners in the Christian regalian sense of the term. Because for the same reason that they could not own the land, they could not sell it either. First of all, a treaty signed by a chief amounts to nothing unless that chief is recognized and followed by his people, which involves a coercive leverage, which was logistically difficult to enforce without state infrastructure, and which self-destituent constitutions like the Gainerigoa consistently work to annul. On the other hand, as Kanien'kehá:ka elder Digarundege says, provided that the earth is a mother to the original people, one cannot sell his own mother, and one cannot cut her into pieces. For her part, Gantineta explains that the Kanien'kehá:ka people view the land as a trust that is kept for the children yet to come. The real owners of the land are the Tahaki kun suntunche, literally the coming phases which are still on the ground, which means the future generations that are still within Mother Earth's womb. The earth is the metonymic crucible for the future generations, nourished by and washed over by the ancestors, and protected by the living and the women first. Wampum 44, Article 44 of the Great Law, the Gayanregoa, states that the Ganistansera, which are the women, are the progenitors of the nation. They shall own the land and the soil to caretake for the future generations. As the land is passed on from the ancestors to those that are still to come, humans lose their yoke over the land as soon as they are born. Caring for the future can then be a name, a name for or a definition for tradition. Somewhere between the spirits of past ancestors and those of the babies yet to come are trapped the children murdered by colonial churches and states. Their souls kept both from living and from dying, deprived not only of a proper burial, but of their very names. Their souls were denied the most basic respect for the dead, which gave birth to human culture. When ancestors come up for a reason, it is often to assist the living in protecting the land for those who come. This is what happened in 1990 when the expansion of a golf course over an ancestral cemetery in the pines of Ganisatage triggered a 78-day armed standoff between the Mohawk warriors and the Canadian Army, suddenly bringing Indigenous issues at the forefront of public attention. Now that Mother Earth pushes our lost children to the surface, she is asking something of us, at the bare minimum, to recover all lost children and to make sure that they get a proper burial so that they become ancestors in turn. And specifically for the historical settlers of North America, English or French, like me, she reclaims to restitute all land-grabbed power and wealth to their rightful non-owners forever yet to come. Pending this rematriation, the relevance of our presence here can be reassessed if we finally resolve to abide by the protocol which Indigenous people devised to protect their mother from invaders, from us. The Two Row Wampum's condition for settlers sojourning here was that they would remain on their ship, keeping themselves at bay on the waters where they would leave no trace. Rather than a metaphorical taunt, the Two Row Wampum's last extremity, asking settlers to board their ship along with all their language, culture, and infrastructure and sail back to Europe, now ought to be considered as a metonymical request to release the land and let Mother Earth replenish. Thus, the only way to repair the genocide might be to restitute every hillside, every valley, every plain and grove to the invisible dead which Squamish Chief Seattle prophesied would go on haunting the white men of tomorrow. I know why I added this highlight here. It's hard to read. I wasn't there when I did it, but this is the full quote from Chief Seattle. Pretty interesting quote. So that's it for my presentation.
So thank you a lot, merci. Would you want to keep sharing screen or do you want to go back?
Oh, we can go back. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So we'll now start a question period. Do you mind if I take the computer?
Yeah.
Sorry. How do you stop? Okay. So we'll open up the floor for questions. You can ask them in the chat section as well as just click the little raise your hand, or just speak up and put on your audio if you want. So, and some people are saying thank you in the chat. Yeah, Eduardo.
I can't see the screen. People are.
No, go for it.
Thanks for making talk. I mean, I sense, there's an incredible richness to this, and I've been pretty familiar with a lot of your work on the Wampum, because working on it, following and all that. But I guess I want to really just ask a really kind of stupid, just like a just simple question. I'm still having a lot of trouble with the metaphor metanym thing. If you could just talk that through in very simple, like concrete examples and where this is coming from, like who's analytic. But the first thing is like, okay, let's take the wampum, the two row wampum. Like, who's treating it as a metaphor? What does that mean exactly? And then who's treating it as a metonym, and what does that mean exactly? And maybe just redefine the terms metaphor and metonym. I'm just having some trouble just following it all. I mean, it's simple. Sorry.
Yeah, it's actually very complicated for me still. You know, I have this also this settler colonial mind where I tend to see any symbolism as a metaphorical.
Okay, so yeah,
I'm just trying to.
I mean, I guess like the idea. I think of what you mean by metaphor seems really simple to me. Like it's right. It's like I think another way to call this is multiculturalism, right? It's something that's obviously representing something else, where the representation is less important than the thing, and it's a mere representation. So okay, I think I get that. So what is a metonym?
Mm-hmm. I tend to understand it as a shortcut that's internal. That I don't know. There's Lévi-Strauss, you know, in the Savage Mind. He opposes them, and that's like the classical contrast that he does, and he. Because he describes all, you know, clan denominations as metaphors for, as using natural metaphors, you know, that come from animal species, but that are only, you know, only images that serve to organize a system and balance the system. And then he says, if I recall, that he opposes metaphorical systems such as clans to metonymical systems, which he includes sacrifice, for instance, in that transformations that are that don't function through distinction or difference, but it's actually hard to get at with me. I'm just, you know, for me too, it's I'm trying to understand myself what it means.
So, I guess I get. I mean, I get your, you know, wanting to get away from metaphor. I'm just like. I'm just still not fully understood. Like, you know, contained or contained does not seem metonymical to me. They're two very different kinds. What a container is and what is contained are very different kinds of things.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering I don't know. I'm just having trouble understanding what exactly a metonym is and what it's doing here. Like, and I'm not, and it's not like I mean, I guess I get a little bit worried whenever there's just an, an inverse opposite there that's just like, oh, it's not a this, it's a that, and they're just opposites. But still, I mean, if I understood better what that opposite was, maybe it would be compelling, but I just don't understand what a metonym is. I mean,
Yeah. I don't think they're necessarily opposite either. I don't think they're, opposite like in a mirror or, I think it might be precisely something that, we can't really, the way I try to explain it is that it's once a relationship is connected to all the relations that it becomes metonymical, that everything is inside something else.
One particular thing is actually part of a larger thing, and therefore you have a contiguous thing rather than a kind of jumping. This stands for that.
Yeah.
So
Holistic interconnectedness, or also this kind of I know it's still very abstract, but this really in the Goa, there's these both movements, centripetal and centrifugal, where the farthest entity is actually also the closest. There's like this internal connectedness that can be pieced into, into this is a metaphor for this thing that's distinct from others. It's really some kind of, but I'm proposing this as like a reflection that we have to make, just because Genocide scholars, made that distinction. And I still personally have a hard time understanding exactly what it is.
This is an ethnographic, metonym is the ethnographic term. People are using that term.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's Kathleen Debicki, especially in an article that she suggests that we should stop seeing those imageries as metaphors, but as concrete metonymies of how things are internally related, that everything works the same way.
Yeah.
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 But I'm trying to, I understand, I'm also confused as to what it means, and I have a hard time wrapping my head around it.
Yeah.
So.
I have other questions, but later,
But this idea of, sailing back to Europe, or of, removing all infrastructure, or, of undeveloping, or of, removing Western civilization on Turtle Island as some kind of carpet, like back in the days of the ghost dance, that was the idea, a prophecy that Western civilization would simply vanish away and there would be restitution of the pre-colonial Turtle Island. I'm wondering myself, that's what it means to do this metonomically, not see it as a metaphor, but actually enforce it and
so
live by it.
that would be, because before you were talking about empirical versus metaphor, but what is metonymic? Like, one thing is to say, okay, this is not a metaphor. You literally want to do this, right? Like all the whites should get onto ships, and they should actually live on ships, and they should have relations, and they should go back. So that would be you're saying that there's a potential reading of that as non-metaphorical, right?
Yeah.
But that would be literal, not metaphorical. But how would it be metonymic? Or what would be I can see metaphor, literal, and then but then there's this other thing which is not neither. So what is the metonym of the two row? The metonymic, like in practical terms, what is the two row wampum metonymic reading of it?
Yeah, well, that's the conclusion of my text, is that we have to start thinking about that, perhaps. I haven't got a precise answer. I'm not sure what it means exactly, but that's the request.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, that's a request. What it means is for us to see.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's just Yeah, the
That's a
beginning
good
of this
question to
idea.
pose, but,
Yeah,
it's
if
very-
anyone else can help, I don't know.
Yeah,
Citrag, I know he knows more about it. What
Yeah,
a
yeah, yeah.
metonym might mean.
yeah, I don't want to, I can't see, it's like, it feels like there's three people here, but.
Well, I mean, that's a great start to the conversation. And speaking of Citrag, you had your hand up, but then you raised it. I don't know if that's because you don't feel like talking anymore or.
Well, this is such a rich talk that I don't know if we should keep talking about metaphor and metonym, but maybe just a couple of quick ideas. I think Levi-Strauss got metonym and metaphor from Roman Jakobson. And the main idea there is one that also has a spatial relationship in terms of the horizontal plane and the vertical plane.
Yeah.
And metaphor works by substitution, and instead metonym works by contiguity.
Mhm.
But that contiguity doesn't necessarily mean all relations, right? It's just on the horizontal plane of language. So the syntagmatic plane, what you actually pronounce and read, the way in which words, let's say, or segments would be, or phonemes would be connected one to the other. That would be the metonym.
Mhm.
But I think what you're, we circle back to Eduardo here. I think that it seemed to me that what you were discussing was also in some way related to a more Peirce, and Charles Sanders Peirce idea of metonym and metaphor, where metonym would be a sort of an indexical relationship, fire and smoke, and instead metaphor would be one that is by convention. So there is a symbolic convention that establishes a relationship between a sign and its referent.
Possibly, yeah.
So yeah, I was actually, unfortunately my internet sort of got cut off at one point, but did you talk about analogy? Is that
Analogy, yeah. It runs through that, yeah.
because that is another very interesting terrain, which in my view, from what I understand, is neither metonymic nor metaphorical, really. It could be thought in a different way.
It could be both, you think?
Maybe, but analogy, well, I don't know enough, frankly, to say, but I think analogy seems more capacious in my view because it implies a transformation in the process
Mhm.
that neither metaphor nor perhaps metonymy allow for.
Mm.
That the relationship between two terms that are in analogical relationship
Mhm.
is one that is in itself transformative in a way that maybe neither metaphor nor metonym might be.
Yeah, that's possible if we think just of how, well, I don't know, analogical music instruments might work. It works, yes, by a contiguity between, you have an electric keyboard. It's really, it's concrete material, keys that are touched and then transmutated into electrical current by a position with digital means that are more representative or that are, like metaphorical or something, like the 0-1 of
Right.
the digital is like a representation of what it would be, but there's no effective transformation of a type of energy into something else. That might be a way to think about it.
Yeah, that's Bateson view, right?
Yeah. Great. There's Leslie.
I don't know much about metaphor, economy, all this kind of stuff. It's fascinating. But the way I'm thinking about this is, what is metaphorical, what's metonymical about Two Row Wampum? It seems to me one way to think about this is just the very different ways in which the belt is enacted, understood in life. two very different relationships that are being articulated, where say the Europeans are taking this metaphorically or something, I don't know, but like they don't understand the relationality that is being implied, the very density that is being implied in this very simple kind of two boats going down a stream, right? At the same time, they do understand, I think, and you said this very clearly when you quoted Duncan Campbell Scott and the other dude, who they had a very rich understanding of what they were up to with residential schools, where they were actually articulating a very metonymical, if I'm understanding this conversation correctly, a very metonymical way of destroying Indigenous life.
Right.
They knew exactly that they had to destroy the analogic flows of kinship. They had to displace people from land. They had to separate kinship relations. They had to destroy language. They had to cut your hair, for God's sakes, right? They put knives or like pins through your tongue when you spoke your native language. These things are all a very literal understanding to me of what they were up to. Very rich metonymical. I don't know if this is the right word, but you know, they're articulating the complexity of what the settler colonial project is all about. And it's not just about land, it's about all the relationships that are being articulated on that land. So they knew very well actually what they were doing, right?
Yeah.
And so then I like how you're tying this into you know, the question of ghosts, questions of graves. There's a way in which quite literally we are being haunted in this moment. The bones are coming back up. The ghosts are confronting us. The simultaneous, like it's maybe it's a process, maybe it's a structure of disavowal, this like simultaneous knowing and unknowing about what the settler colonial project is all about. You know, treating it maybe in like a superficially metaphorical way, yet at the same time enacting very astutely the complexities of destroying Indigenous life. And now we're experiencing, you know, the outcome of that. The bones are coming up. We have to call an election to stop people from talking about this. Like, these are all very calculated. Pam Palmander had it very clear when she said this is a calculated attempt to, you know, keep us from talking about these things. So that's kind of the way that I'm thinking about this. I thought you showed very astutely how this negotiation is happening, right? And this complex kind of like negotiation between literal, metaphorical, metonymical, like the settlers know exactly what's going on, but there's like a way in which it's constantly being disavowed or repressed. I don't know, something like a psychoanalytic concept like that might be useful here too, for thinking of these processes of condensation and displacement and whatever. But those are just some thoughts I had. I thought it was really good, Philippe. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, thanks. That's really interesting. Yeah, I agree with how residential school system was very aware of how all the relationships, you know, were implied, and it went in all those tiny details. The length of the hair and all those details were related, you know, and had to be suppressed at the same time. And that's really a knowledge of the contiguities between, you know, all those, all that accounts for a form of life. And Duncan Campbell Scott especially was pretty knowledgeable, especially of Iroquois culture. He had, you know, he had commissioned the a written version of the Great Law of Peace of the Gainagoa by Chief Gibson. And he had himself, I think he translate even some bits. He worked on it, you know, and that was like a 600-page, you know, epic of the foundation of the league and everything. So he was really knowledgeable of how to do that. And all these psychological processes by which, you know, a genocide is metaphorized or something, that, you know, everything that, and it's just by bad faith, or, you know, the fact that it's hard to live knowing that your existence here, you know, rests upon such atrocious, killing children and everything. And even then, while it was happening, you had, for residential schools, they had subscriptions and crowdfundings, with people who are honestly, Christians, who honestly thought that these children, these pagans, had to be helped, and they gave money and everything. They saw it as, caring for them. And well, actually, they were, their souls were lost, if they were left alone. So all these processes, just their contemporary version is so, entangled and mixed and full of, it's at this, there's so many things going on, especially in those communities that are central in the network of Indigenous resistance. Historically in Ganawage, for instance, these days there's a process to resume traditional governance, and it's pretty curious what's going on, because they have the band council, which is imposed by the federal government, that are they have this plan for restoring traditional governance. So they want to change the names of the band council chiefs and find Mohawk names for them, and try to give some kind of traditional orientation to it, and all this in the name of overcoming the historical divisions, and that have been created within the community. But it's all mixed in such a way that finally the traditionalists, and especially the Gayan followers related to the warrior society, who just always, we've always been in the politics of refusal to, use Oliver Simpson's word, just refusing, without any concession, any type of Canadian, institution or relationship that wouldn't be, a nation to nation as separate entities. They are now presented as sowing division or something, so all these processes just happen at this point, where, reconciliation, just in general, to the ears of most traditionalists I've spoken with, it sounds like an injunction to get over it, just now just talk about something else. Now you're in 21st century, just get used to it or something. Okay, yes, it did happen, but go somewhere else. And well, in Mohawk Ganyangeha language, there's no word for I'm sorry. All you can say is I will make it right. It doesn't count to say you're sorry. It doesn't mean anything for them. It's just what are you going to do to repair this? So yeah, that's about it. Really interesting. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that great question and answer. Now, Ségolène, you had a question, or you had your hand up?
I had, but I don't know if that would lead to. I don't know if people want to speak more about the metonymy and contiguity. I don't know, Paul, if your question is more related to that conversation. No. So I was. So it's a kind of it's a different topic in your talk, but it was about this idea of this Lockean category of labor and what is making the property is the labor, and it's a very, it's this abstract idea of labor, and I'm thinking of feminist thinking about domestic labor and how they would use labor in the family and kin idea to reclaim that category. But I think what you're pointing to is a very different conception of what is responsibility, what is it's not ownership, I don't even know the word for that, but it's this idea that you cannot use this abstract category of labor even in a kin context. And I don't think you mentioned it, but I know in Agamben context we have this idea of inoperativity, and I wonder how you would conceptualize the kinship relationship. You know, this idea that you have responsibility, but you have also you have also an incentive not to, you know, not to get involved, not to intervene, and you have responsibility, and that cannot, I think, be conceptualized into a category of labor, whether feminist or not. And I think that's really something I would like to delve in. Maybe what is this this relationship based on? I'm using again, Ben, you know, inoperativity concept, but maybe there are other ways to think about what is this non-property, non-ownership, non-labor, but that is still responsibility, and that's also a way not to appropriate, because it's, we cannot think of it in our settler conceptual categories. And it's just an open question.
Yeah, well, yeah, thanks for that. It's actually some translation, as I've heard of the Thanksgiving address, were really fascinating, where they describe all those animals and even the insects and plants as carrying their duties and responsibilities, you know, and they thank them for continuing to do what they do to ensure the continuity of what they call creation, you know, instead of the creator. These traditionals talk about creation. They say zahoyera, which is the sometimes translated as nature, but it's like the continuity of the forever. You know, it's like this, there's a foreverness, and all those insects and plants, they're doing their thing. Everything they do is, you know, to keep creation going that way. And by all of them staying in their own role, you know, by refraining from impeding the other forms of life also necessary for creation from doing their own thing too. They all remain distinct and having their own responsibilities and their ways of doing things. And I think for the idea of labor, inoperativity, and what Agamben calls with Bartleby the power not to, I think that's actually maybe the hardest labor, is refraining from transforming the world that we experience, so that to make it more convenient to our own ways of living, or our own, you know, psychic categories, or to make it more legible to and usable for our needs. I think that's the you know, maybe the hardest task, and the labor that, you know, requires the most sweat. And it's something I was reading Barbara Mann's book on the Mohawk women, and how, you know, all this debate, is it only a matrilinear or a matriarchal society? And she really stresses the point that it's a matriarchal society. And through a historical point of view, where they, those Iroquois peoples had been previously in the Mississippi Valley at the time where there was the mound builders and Cahokia and all those, you know, big societies, mound builders, you know, quasi pyramids that were being built. And at that moment, there had been, you know, they were hoarding grain, you know, like the Sumerians did and everything. There was a caste of priests that formed, and that was you know, controlled by men. So there was men kind of took power at that stage of their nomadic venture through the continent. I think it's like around the 12th or 18th century, and they actually abandoned that, partly because well, as the Mayas and other peoples they depleted the resources also through that kind of functioning. And well, in that book, then feminist Rotinonshonni scholar says that it was the Iroquoians still have that memory that they tried creating a state, and they had been through, you know, having a religion, having the men take power and hoarding grain, and, you know, building an infrastructure, and they had quit that intentionally because they saw it didn't work, and they found this other way led by women that works without any infrastructure, you know, or that builds a settlement that'll last for 30 years before they move to another one. And they saw that it was just easier that you let other forms of life continue their duties and responsibilities. You let Mother Earth replenish. And that was an ideology that is not more primitive, but that came after the state as a conscious decision. So I think that's an interesting take. I don't know if it's how accurate it is, you know, but it's an interesting way to see it with regard to how refraining from encroaching onto another path it takes labor, takes an effort.
Thank you. If there's no follow-up for that, we have Paul or Paul. You can unmute yourself and go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Hi everyone. Thank you so much, Phil, for this great presentation. I really enjoyed it. And my question will be about kinship relationships. And I found it very interesting because, well, I work, as you know, with the Wampis in the Amazon. And in the Amazon, generally, politics can be understood through the terms of alliance, okay, so through the terms of marriage and everything, even between humans, between the Wampis, for example, and strangers, gringos and and like me, or even between humans and non-humans. For example, this is a very classical things in the Amazon. We can call an animal brother-in-law, for example. Whereas here, we saw that among the Mohawk, relations between humans and non-humans are relations of filiation, of it seems of consanguinity. It seems that we call non-humans more sisters or brothers and not brother-in-law. Okay. So I was wondering if what is the articulation between alliance in the matrimonial sense, in the kinship sense, and the political alliance. And very concretely, does the conception of the Two Row Wampum, the alliance, the political alliance, two parallel lines like this, authorize marriage between Mohawk and strangers? Is it yes? Is it possible according to this view of political alliance? I don't know if I'm clear.
Yeah, I think so. Actually, the way is, you know, there's like the Grand Council of the Rotinonshonni Confederacy, where you have all the nations, and they have 50 chiefs, and they're on three sides of the room. They're the younger brothers and the older brothers. They have two nations in each, and the Onondaga are the fire keepers, and they're like a third party that can break deadlocks if they happen. But in the nations themselves, instead of the room being separated between nations, it's between the clans. And in the Mohawk, it's mainly 3 clans, Turtle, Bear, and Wolf. And the thing is, precisely, the Two Row Wampum, you know, it applies to the relationships between nations where they're all, you know, it's a decentralized confederacy alliance where, you know, each nation can, you know, do what it wants for its own internal affairs. They just, you know, they ally precisely in that measure, you know, in that to that extent that they respect, you know, one another, and then so they can, you know, work together against an incoming enemy, even though it was, you know, at first it was supposed to be Diganawita's vision for the Confederacy was that all indigenous nations could be integrated. So then the same alliance through separation would imply at the national level would rather be in relations between clans. But the thing is, precisely, you can only marry outside of your matrilineal clan. And even that, for the Rotinonshonni, the clans, they extend beyond nations to all Rotinonshonni nations, and even beyond the Iroquoian language group. They say that a wolf clan from another faraway nation is also family and will have to be, you know, welcomed if they travel there, and welcome really as immediate brothers, even though they have no consanguineous relation, or they don't know each other, but they're still considered immediate brothers. So precisely, marriage is only possible between 2 distinct rows. You can't marry inside your own row. It is a relationship with difference. So I think, well, it might be similar in that way to
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
Wampies that you're talking about. Yeah, the familial relationships. The thing is, as these metonymies, not to say metaphors of you know, of family relationships are extended, you know, to the whole Confederacy and beyond. Actually, it internalizes the political, diplomatic, you know, separation proper to politics. It internalizes it in the family at the same time of extending the analogical flow of kinship to the farthest point. So it's really that it kind of locks between the centrifugal and centripetal. You know, it locks where the farthest is the closest, and vice versa. But there's always both the separation and the flow of kinship.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
Really fascinating. Thank you.
Leslie, yeah.
Yeah, unless there's someone else.
There's
Is
just
there
one
someone
more
else?
message. Thank you again. If there's no follow-up, I'm going to just read a bit, and before going to Les, Caroline, as usual, has shared some really interesting thoughts and stuff. As she's cringing as I say that. In the opening slide, the destruction of the Ryerson structure is depicted, whose head is covered with red paint and shrouded with the red and yellow flag of what appears to be a stereotypical native man. It seems that this is an example of iconoclast, but also that destruction of one type of contested history and Canadian settler heritage is also an act of replacing that heritage with another type of contested heritage, the flag with the very mascot-esque image of the so-called Native Canadian, reifying problematic images. As we know now, mascots and images are part of the wider post-colonial toolkit used to legitimize violence against Indigenous peoples in Canada and the US. While this is not a mascot, does the site of the iconoclasm function differently where such images are needed, necessary, depoliticized? Could you say a bit more about this? Thank you, Caroline.
Yeah, great. Maybe, I don't know if we could put back that image There.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, now I understand what was.
Actually, that flag is it's called the Unity flag. It's been created in 1972 when the Mohawk Warrior Society was created. So the book that I worked on editing that should be released next spring tells the story of how it was done. It was painted by Louis Hall Garunaktaje, who was a figure in the 60s, 70s, 80s. He was an official condoled chief too, but a very, he also wrote the Warrior's Handbook and some pamphlets that are really, staunchly sovereigntist, but also very funny. He's like joking all the time, and those things have been published in just in like pirate versions in the 70s and 80s, and what we're doing is we're republishing it, with editorial explanations for what happened. And well, you see the sun, as I said, the men are associated with the forest, with beyond the village clearing, with going at war, going at hunting, and are cosmologically associated with the stars and the sun. Actually, the war chief is also often called Roskan Ragete Goa. The warriors are called Rotiskan Ragete, and the war chief is called Roskan Ragete Goa, which is like the great warrior. But it's also a term that's used for the sun itself, associated with the role of providing light and warmth to a world, to a earth that is fundamentally female. And Louis Hall had this thing, he talked a lot about psychological warfare. Actually, the story he tells in the book of how it was created, the Warrior Society in the 70s, actually it was more a question of rekindling the men's council fire, men who are there to enforce the women's decisions and assist to the women. But then they decided to call it Mohawk Warrior Society to scare the colonial state. And what they did is they printed out this flag and into little badges, and they made 200 of them. And suddenly in Ganawage, everyone had a Mohawk Warrior Society badge with this scary flag, and that was to impress, to scare the state. And effectively it did work, because they had more bargaining power, they started getting more leverage, and it was used as a means of psychological warfare, and just very consciously so, being some kind of. And in his other paintings, and we're going to include it some in the book, he has this style of painting that's very colorful. He used actually paint for the walls, and not not for paintings, and very bright colors, and a very kind of the style is really like propaganda. He's using that. He's always portraying very beautiful, strong Indigenous people, really working on that pride, and it can really stylistically it really resembles advertisement or propaganda from USSR and stuff like that, and that was consciously so to to bolster the pride of Indigenous people, so they would resist and get better living conditions. So it is, yeah, in fact, some kind of, I know if it's a mascot, but it's a conscious effort to have a bold approach, and it's really this boldness, I think, that the Warrior Society also has proved as effective. Just going there in New York State, taking this land, scaring the scaring the hell out of everyone and getting it at the end, you know, whereas just asking for something or having a lawsuit and where the lawyers will take half of the money and it will take all your life to get something. Well, it's faster and more effective just to go the way that things actually empirically work, where it's relations of you know, force, and that's how it works, you know. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you a lot for that comment, question, as well as interesting answer. If there's no follow-up, we're going to move on to Les, just as just give me 2 seconds to stop sharing this. It's also interesting to see how psychological warfare, which is often kind of more the dominant force, uses it against the less dominant force. It's interesting to see it flipped around, and psychological warfare is, of course, interesting in a time where, according to the Ottawa Citizen, the Canadian military has been waging psychological warfare on the Canadian population since the beginning of the pandemic. Okie dokie. So now we have a question from Les.
Philippe, this is such a interesting. I'm so glad I finally got to hear your research articulated in this way. It's like giving me a lot of thoughts, eh? And kind of picking up on what we already started talking about, and a little bit on Paul's question too, I think. You know, this question about kinship and alliance. And you basically, I think, rightly showed us that, you know, the Two Row Wampum is basically an invitation for marriage, in a sense. You know, like it's conditions for the possibility of marriage that were just absolutely not recognized. Or not recognized, I don't know. I still don't know how to phrase that, because I do feel like there's a profound recognition that's just being disavowed, right?
It's marriage as alliance.
Yeah, but okay, so why is that different?
Because, I mean, I think marriage as alliance is the sense that the differences are still super important. It's
Yeah.
never just melding,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Differences are important, but at least you're like, you still have to be accepted on an equal grounding
Yeah,
to be part,
yeah,
for those differences to matter,
Yeah.
you know? So it's, I don't know, there's something about that, but like it's, I don't know if this question is actually going to go anywhere, if it makes sense, but like I'm thinking, you know, all this elaboration you've done for us about like particularly Haudenosaunee kinship, the analogic flows of this kinship. It's like making me think of the opposite side of the equation about settler kinship. And like, what would that be, right? Like, I feel like we can actually use this analysis to develop a very robust anthropological theory about settler forms of kinship, let's say. And so what does it mean, though, that from the start, there's a denial or a misrecognition or whatever that is? I still don't know how to define that, of like the Haudenosaunee invitation, you know, and constantly this repression or disavowal of the dead bodies, you know, this profound understanding of how to kill the Indigenous life. And like, we should absolutely refuse cultural genocide, I think. Like, this is one of those metaphorical, superficial moves. Like, it's just genocide, right? Like, this is a Patrick Wolf move too. He's like, deny. It's kind of like talking about reconciliation. It's just a meaningless, superficial term, right? But the point still being like, what kind of kinship is this that's constantly denying its relations, yet still in profound relation, you know, where like the whole of Canada, as you put it, like is a graveyard that we should take quite literally, I think, is one of your points. So what form of kinship is that, you know, where like the relations are always being denied, and they're mostly ghosts, actually. Like, then you have to have relationships with all these ghosts.
Yeah.
Not like, I don't know, there's something that's, I can't formulate it necessarily, but you're making me think about these things. It's pretty exciting.
Yeah, really interesting. Actually, this idea that the Two Row Wampum would, you know, be an invitation for marriage in a sense. It's something, yeah, it's, I studied the transcripts of the negotiations between Minister of Indigenous Services, Mark Miller, and the Mohawks who were blocking the tracks in Tyntanaga, 2020, when they came there and lasted like 5 hours, 7 hours of discussions and really deep stuff. And at several points in the discussion, they talked about the Two Row Wampum. And once there was a Mohawk who said, yeah, actually, this is the same framework for marriage, or, you know, relationships between man and wife are like that, or between genders. And that was one of the moments where they, you know, extended the meaning of the Two Row Wampum. And then another occasion, I was the war chief there in Tainaga, Ganan Hario. He said that Two Row Wampum is not only a protocol for relationships with settlers, but it's actually the law of the land. That's what he said. And that was the law of the land that Europeans were invited to respect and to join. And it's through this naval imagery or metonymy of staying within your ship, keeping your culture within your ship. And there's another very important Rotinonshonni symbol, the silver covenant chain. I didn't show it, but I had an image of that. There's wampums about it, and that defines relationship with the British crown since early 18th century. It was also exchanged with different American states and with the British. And that is very rare that it's connected with the Two Row Wampum, and colonizers always, you know, saw it as something different, or they saw it as some kind of metaphor for something they didn't understand, and just, okay, we'll call it silver covenant chain. But actually what traditionalists say is that it was in this agreement for the Two Row Wampum. At first it was with the Dutch, and it allowed the Dutch to dock their ship to the continent using a hemp rope. And then when the French came, they did the same, but with an iron rope. And then with the British, it was with a silver chain, because they realized that they had to polish it regularly. It would tarnish, and it would, you know, require them to meet as to polish the silver chain. And the Queen actually came last time in 2010, and she passed in Taintanaga to polish the silver covenant chain. And when Mark Miller visited, negotiated with people blocking the tracks in Taintanaga, he said, "Oh, I will come to polish the silver chain." But actually, Canada never did that. It was the first time it was mentioned by the state of Canada, its relationship with the British. But what it says actually, in the words of the elders, is really that the right of Europeans here is to stay at bay, to have their ship chained to the continent, but to refrain from transforming that continent to their own advantage. But the thing is, the same with the Indigenous people. That's why it's the law of the land. They're also staying on their canoe and refraining from imposing their own ways on the other forms of life that are inhabiting the forest. So it's really this idea that this is just the basic way, the law of the land, that all relations function is through this reciprocity of acknowledging difference and working together in a parallel way. You know, there's this flow of moving together, but that depends on remaining separate. You know, that's really like the basic thing. I don't know why Europeans didn't understand that. Maybe because they were, you know, infatuated with Christian integrism back then, you know, and they were really into transforming the whole world, so it, you know, becomes this celestial Jerusalem or something, and really into this this mission that continued until pretty fairly recently, actually. So I just think that, yeah, Christianity conversion might be what's most opposite to what the Two Row Wampum suggests. You know, this effort to convert someone, bringing into your own line, might be, yeah, the most opposite. I think the most contrary to the law of this land. and then appropriation as well. But what I'm trying to imagine now is what it would mean if all of this land, especially Montreal, is unceded territory. What would it mean for us to recognize that actually the Gayanerigoa is still in effect, and that's the true law of this land? And how could we do that without any metaphor, literally or metonomically, but abide by it and live by it? And I'm trying to ask the people I work with what that could look like. They seem to say it's possible. It was intended for that. That's still the offer that's on the table, but we got to understand what it means, you know? Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much for that. And we're going to go to Eduardo. Just an interesting reminder that Indigenous or colonial or anything in Canada, we are still under the dominion of an alien force, that being Her Majesty the Queen. Okey doke.
Nicholas, I love your running commentary.
Yeah, thanks.
This is great. I mean, it's funny because a lot of the comments, the question I have are built on ways in which other questions are asking things. So that's super exciting. I want to I'm going to have a few threads. I just want to comment on them with I don't know. So first of all, you know, in some ways in your comments, you're talking about the Iroquois as in some ways the postmodern society, right? Because they have already went through and rejected the state in modern form. And in some ways, in its kind of speculative nature, that is, in the sense of thinking about this not in terms of the ancestors' roles in creating a future. I see pieces of a whole bunch of stuff coming together here, which I think are super exciting. Let me just try to lay out a couple of them. First of all, in terms of Les's question, I think one of the places to really piece together what's meant here by the metonymy of the wampum is really understanding what's going on those train tracks. Like, here, this is it, let's do it, you know? That feels like, you know, that's not metaphoric. But what is it? So then the other two pieces I wanted to just briefly talk about, well, one large one in terms of the postmodern is what we mean here by the social, because I see a couple of I see a couple of things that are going on that kind of raise certain kinds of, well, I don't know. First of all, the way you've been discussing haunting, or it seems to be, it's a big talk. I don't remember exactly, but the way somebody was talking about haunting, it sounds like very much like a 19th century anthropological move of saying, well, you know, what ghosts are? Well, they are actually social relationships, right? Which seems like, okay, great, that's cool. But like, it's also, we've kind of done that in some ways. I mean, maybe that's okay, you've done something, but, and I think the same thing is also true about this question about cultural genocide versus genocide. I mean, I'm not gonna make an opinion on what the name of this horror is, but if we recall, in the words, and I forgot who of this reformer, the goal is to assimilate Indigenous peoples into a body politic, right? I mean, I just think that somehow understanding what kind of social you're talking about in terms of what we mean by ghosts is going to help differentiate that, you know, like, I'm not sure exactly how to say this, but like the claim here is to make a rearrangement of the social, which is obviously violent for a particular reason, but not just because it's one sociality versus another sociality, because something else is taken out, which is not exactly social in the way that you're defining it. I think there's something missing about the way that you're talking about social, such that simply the benign integration of the Indigenous people into the body politic can be seen as violent. But that requires another idea of the social that has to come out. That's one point. Two other just quick points within this postmodernist vein. This is getting to Segolen's point about labor. I think this is really interesting about what kind of work is going on here with like you can see, you know, there's the obvious kind of work that, you know, physical work is one kind of work that we're familiar with, and it's obviously the kind of work that is privileged in a modernist regime, whether it's a kind of whatever, left, right, socialist, capitalist, right? But there's a very specific kind of ethical labor here, right? And there's something, like physical work is overcoming certain kinds of resistances, right? But the labor here of what it means to you yourself, be a limit for yourself, seems to be super important. So like this change in valence of what it means to be talking about work, I find really interesting. And then for another conversation, I've been reading a lot, rereading a lot, Terry Deacon's understandings of emergence, in which work requires different meanings at different sort of different kinds of emergent levels. Finally, last point about this, this is getting to Carolyn's question about the logo. I mean, yeah, embracing full on that this is advertising, I think is a very interesting, like really figuring out what's going on here. What is the joke? I mean, I picked up on this in the Warrior, the society materials in the book. Like there's an element of humor that requires a kind of analysis. But there's an element of this kind of, I mean, what is it to say that this is advertising? And it is, these are mascots, right? In a particular kind of a way, but and it's a social realism, but it's, a social realism in which society is no longer society as the social realist might say, like there's something really interesting going on that you could really burrow into there. Anyways, enough. Super rich.
Yeah, and super rich commentary as well. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I don't so much. I don't even know if I can answer all of this on the ethical labor and refraining from on work on oneself, refraining from doing what you would spontaneously, it's like refraining from a certain work and be refraining from physical work, for instance, might be that self-restraint or ethical labor of knowing where you stand.
I mean, I'm thinking of Kaja Silverman's, a certain way I think about psychoanalytic, the idea of limits, right? There's a certain kind of ethical work of recognizing your own limit, your finitude, which is sort of, goes away from the manifest destiny or the kind of complete. And yet the ancestors are also about propagating something. I don't know. It's something to think about.
That's the important thing about, distinctions and, and carrying on your own responsibilities or duties and not thinking that you can, be something else than yourself. And I think that might be for any type, like whiteness or manhood or all of these cis, features of actually being free from your own identity, like being a man is walking in the street, not being, not being pointed as, not having to think about your gender. Being white is not being of any race, you're just a guy, just a person. While actually there is a bias in being a man, it's a limited condition. You're really conditioned by, you're not a universal being. You're limited by your manhood or your whitehood, and these are features where you're constricted. And acknowledging that and refraining from trying to be, well, that doesn't mean not to deconstruct yourself, but there's something I find fascinating in the way that Rotinonshonni culture or, works with through distinctions, through contrast, through that aren't, necessarily associated with, a man is not necessarily, apparently there's procedures where, men can become women and it's not a big deal, you can become something else, but then you become that something else and you're also restricted by it. But it's, and then all about the social. It's not a term that I affection that much. I don't, I don't see what it means exactly. It's just by lack of a better word, relations is more something. But that quote on haunting, Avery F. Gordon, she wrote this amazing book. I don't remember the title, on an anthropology of haunting and ghosts. It's that's just a little quote from hers, but it's a pretty good thing, and it's fairly recent, so it's not 19th century, but it's more saying that, yeah.
I mean, I think of the Komarovs, with their sense of zombies and things like that, that are reflecting the social conditions. I mean, I think that there's something about. I mean, I think it's a great insight, but I think the moment like these things, the ghosts are talking about social relationships, it risks the kind of metaphor move. I'm not saying that that's exactly happening, but that just, and I think that that's also what makes partially this genocide argument complicated. I mean, the people there were trying to bring people into another social form, and to get at the violence of that, which it is violent. I'm not saying it's not violent. If you don't have a richer vocabulary for relationality, I think you can't get at why that's so violent, right? It seems benign, right? If you just look at it, social, it's like, well, states are better. Put them in a state. That's what they need to do. But if you have this other way of talking about it, then you can get at the specific violence of it in a better way, I think. See what I'm saying?
That's kind of, yeah, it kind of brings back to Les's question on what is kinship for settler colonists, or, for Western society, or just capitalistic. What are people in relation at all? What I see is then, I really think, concretely, it's relations. What are they funneled through? What are they channeled through? How do they happen? How do you meet people? I think that's the thing that has to be, assessed materially. How do you encounter anyone? And just the tendency seems to be to replace, in Western society, replacing encounter by contact, replacing it with infrastructure, having to pass through infrastructure that's designed, and that's that serves interest, and where people make money out of it, and that you can't escape from those design structures through which relationships flow, and so then those connections are dependent on this infrastructure. Well, that's something else, it's a huge thing, and I might not be, the expert in that subject on present culture now, but yeah. But I agree with the social, we have to think about, what that means exactly, and what does this word even refer to, or what does it do to think of us as belonging in this society? Well, we were just born here and, given a certain type of world that we had to deal with. But it's, that's why Avery Gordon, she talks less about social relations than historical effects, there's just a sedimentation of especially infrastructures, it's just stuff that we're walking on the streets, and you can't, you can't do away with it. We're on built structures.
Thank you. So we're over time, but we still have some questions. So if you want to hang out, still hang out if that's okay with Phil. Ségolène, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I think it's about the Les's questions, and the one that the question of what is kinship among settlers, and I think one thing we didn't really discuss and that's in your title, but that's the status of children. And the way children in Western, and settler kinship are considered property and subject without, I mean, it's like to use an Agamben term, it's like a foreclusion, they are to be protected, but also they are denied in their self, personality, rights, and so on. And I think there are many reflection today also about incest. That's start, and saying that incest is not far from being a prohibition; it's a way to reinforce domination, and And I know that you're working also on that questions because you're encountering that not only Indigenous children were abused and used in experiments and buried and but also settler children. And I think that's a connection to be made, like the way children are the really foreclosed being in the settler kinship, and how they are the basis for abuse and domination and so on. And that's not only Indigenous children, but in the whole any child really. So because we didn't really talk about that figure, you talked about fatherhood and the way fatherhood was misunderstood. And I think the father in settler kinship is the owner, is the master. And I was wondering how we could think of children in this context. What is their status in the Mohawk, kinship, but compared to that status of being the absolute object in a way, and blind spots in Western thinking of, in settler thinking about alliances, political relationship, family, kinship, and so on.
Yeah. I don't think I could really, give a precise statement on the status of children in Iroquois culture. There's some elements where the moment where they receive a name, the naming ceremony is an important moment where they're starting to. It's just at the moment where they start to be present and show some features of personality, that they receive a name through that has to be a unique name, and that names their responsibilities and tasks, and it's somewhat a title, a title that names the place of that person in society and its duties out of a few characteristics. But yeah, in Western society, there's this, I'm not an expert at all too, but there's this strange reversibility between, the children being, especially in Christian culture, as being this pure thing, this kind of purity, and also being this evil thing for the same time. And it's in some way, it might be analogous to the status in the Western mind of Indigenous people, being at the same time noble and savage, or of women as being passive and hysterical at the same time. It's kind of, those extremes finally reach themselves, and women are, passive. They it's men who decide and they just follow, but they're hysterical at the same time. It's so they're full and empty at the same time. And I think it's really this Christian mindset, especially, I don't know what more to say, but there is something fucked up, as we say. There was a question by John Galati had a question, I think, no?
Yeah, sorry for having missed you, John. Your turn.
Really, thank you. This was a wonderful talk. I haven't had my image presented for most of it because I'm sitting doing other things, but it was very, very stimulating. And I think the conversation that's followed has been very enriching for all kinds of reasons, of course, with many digressions. And I just wanted to make a couple of comments that return to an earlier phase of the discussion. One is on the metaphor metonymy, which I've given a lot of thought to. I suppose everybody here has, pondering it. A very rich distinction, but it is an analytical distinction. It seems to me that we get confused a bit if we reify those terms, because in fact what we're interested in are very concrete figures of speech and action that explode with meaning. And so trying to say, is this a metaphor, this is a metonymy? Of course, there are distinctions to be made, but it seems to me that's a digression of some sort. What I've done in my work is to analyze some of the concrete ways that people endow actions or objects with significance. And very often, the ones that are the most powerful actually combine elements of metonymy and metaphor. They're often aspects of something or pieces of something that obviously are drawn from the action domain and therefore metonymical. But when the elements that are significant begin to resonate across features of similarity, and therefore they're metaphorical. Seems to me the melding of the two together make for very, very powerful images. And so that's just a comment, although I'd be interested in your thoughts. The example that Caroline was looking at, this object that was portrayed, and the question of what does it mean when people in a certain culture construct images that others perceive it to be as stereotypic. And this is, I think, it's only a problem because, of course, stereotypes are taken to be somehow lesser forms of authenticity. When I think of, I work among the Maasai in East Africa, and of course, their images, now they're very aware that their images are being spewed around the world in different ways, that they've become exemplary of indigenous people in general, Kenya and Tanzania, the prototypes of what it means to be a Kenyan and a Tanzanian, et cetera. And of course, all the travel agencies will have Maasai in their regalia. But what does that say about they themselves? Because this is the way they dress, at least in a customary format, like in their ceremonies. You go to a ceremony, all kinds of people are there, Maasais. Sometimes there are visitors like myself, anthropologists, et cetera. They're not doing it for us. They're doing it for themselves. So what does it mean when there's a form of self-presentation, which is for the self? It says, here at some level, this is what I am. Even if another day I might go and put on a suit or whatever. It seems to me that we sort of confuse ourselves, and we become sort of bound in knots if we begin to say, this is stereotypic, in particular from the outside, and therefore it's going to be seen as a lesser form of authenticity. Well, in fact, we have a wonderful historical dialectic where what people are at one moment becomes something that is about their presentation to the world. It becomes the world's perception of them. And these images go back and forth. They sort of knock into each other. And I think we have to just accept the complexity without necessarily making accusations which will limit what people can do in terms of their own sense of self and their own display of, here's who I am. And at one point, I made an analysis that I thought was helpful, which is that you have Maasais presenting themselves to themselves, but then when they maybe look to others, there may be a bit of irony. I know what you're thinking about me as I present myself in a certain way. So it's not without self-consciousness that people can at one moment be, this is simply who I am, and this is what I'm presenting to them. So these are just a couple of ideas that I thought had some place within this discussion.
Really interesting. Yeah, I agree that as analytical categories, they shouldn't be just opposed, and many images, might include metaphorical and metonymical elements. I haven't, finished really my reflection on that, and I'll in the future I'll try to really come across it more thoroughly. But on stereotypes, that makes me really think, because in especially Mohawk culture, there's this. And I guess also, I think Maasai, Namuniak, who was a colleague in my cohort, came from there, and she told me there's a very strong warrior culture too. Among the Maasai, that might be part of a stereotype, and amongst the Mohawks, it's extremely strong. And places like Ganawage, that flag, the warrior flag, is on almost every building, and everyone has camo at home. Everyone is into this, pride of having been the strongest, military force in the continent, where that determined the issue of many colonial battles. Where who did the Mohawks side with, and that's like the myth and the history that it came from. And there's this warrior and even military culture in places like Ganawage, and pride that comes out of it. It's curious because the way, they talk to me about it, it's as if it had already been a stereotype, or known as a stereotype, back in the colonial days of those battles, where the Iroquois would war paint and war whoops, and they knew that the Europeans were scared of them. They knew, they thought they were cannibals, and they would eat them alive, and they played on that. That was the psychological warfare that helped them to win the battles, was playing with those stereotypes, which they can also become. So it's, I think there should be a non-essentialist approach to, what is a stereotype or not. Maybe we're always building, our vision of authenticity on imagery that we inherited.
That's John's point.
Oh, okay. Gonna let him answer.
I'll answer. If you want to, I don't know.
What was I to say?
The authenticity, very interesting work by Jeff Corn-Passalon.
I just figured that on especially, there's so many things that have been written in the academe on virtually everything that's written about this particular strain of Mohawk culture, which is like the warrior culture linked to those traditionalists and it's really certain families, that have this stance, sovereigntist and everything. But almost all the scholar works I've read on that talk about stereotype, and tend to dismiss their vision of their own history as based on advertising, like stereotypes that they apply to themselves. There's theses that have been written on them that are called the rhetorical use of the great law in Ganawage. It's always it's rhetorics. It's like trying to the Two Row Wampum was presented as a forgery, actually, by Gurning and Starna to historians. Who, it was a written document associating it to a particular treaty, was accused of being a forgery. The Great Law itself, the Ganinigoa, anthropologists back then said that, well, they recreated this idea that they had a constitution and made articles, but actually it didn't work like that, and that was a big thing. So there's almost no work that I found on this particular strain of Mohawk culture that doesn't, dismiss it, in a kind of a condescending way as working through stereotypes and based on propaganda like and imagination and reinventing culture and stuff like that. So I'm just trying to imagine other approaches than just distinguishing what is an image that they create themselves, and what is the truth. There's something where the truth is always also based on those images and what you think of yourself and what that others think of yourself, and playing through these things. But it's really interesting. Yeah, thanks.
Perfect. So we do have a hand raised by Caro. So we'll take that question, and then maybe that'll be the last question from the virtual audience. And then I might just wrap things up a bit. But Caro, thanks for raising your hand, and the floor is yours.
Hi, Philippe, that was such a wonderful presentation. I really enjoyed it so much. And just to mention on this last point that to provide a bit more context on the issue of images and mascot and iconoclasm, I personally was involved in getting rid of the so-called Indian mascot years and years ago at my high school. And I was really fascinated by the way in which a mascot can be so malleable that it can touch anyone. So anyone in my high school, even if like a white colonial settler, could be an Indian. It could be applicable to anyone, and anyone could take on that kind of identity. And I'm not sure if the same could be applied to the case of the Maasai, where the distribution of the Maasai image and this distribution of indigeneity across the image of one particular Maasai could then be taken up by the other, and the other could become, Maasai in such a way. But I think these images where you have one sort of almost dehistoricizing and almost depoliticizing image, which in Eduardo's, he mentioned the word benign, but it's not benign at all. It's very deeply political. So I'm very interested, very, very interested in how you will look at this image, seeing as that the image itself comes from a form of resistance. You said they were the colonial, the settlers were scared. They were afraid of this type of image itself. So it itself was used against for a particular reason. Why is it being used now, today, when we have now so many sports mascots have been dissolved over time, and it has become such a huge issue in the US and Canada. So if that makes any sense, I was just so fascinated at how the power and politics of the mascots have been, how that can work across different groups. So there you go, if that makes any more sense to my question. Thanks.
Yeah, well, you might know that book already, but Philippe J. Deloria's Playing Indian is really marvelous for showing how American culture at times reappropriated the image of Indigenous peoples, and especially the Mohawks. The Boston Tea Party were costumed as Mohawks when they dumped the tea, and they were using their war whoops. And at first, there was before there was the image of Columbia as the female figure for the motherland, American motherland. The previous images were Indigenous images, and it was all related to were Indigenous peoples dangerous for the Americans at that moment or not. That's some moments they appeared like inoffensive. They were like in a bad situation, like militarily, and then their image was absorbed by American culture to define its own identity. But then when they became more threatening, then those images shifted and they became, and it's always these shift between these extremes of the noble, innocence and the extreme savagery, cannibal or something. So, and it's the same for sport teams, they're going to eat their enemies. And yeah, it's fascinating.
Awesome. If I may, just before wrapping up, this could be potentially a way to kind of clôturer le tout. You mentioned earlier on that I think it was when you were talking about the notion of cultural genocide, right? Trudeau saying that instead of actual genocide, and how through that the public secret is destroyed by being partially shown, as if metaphorically resolved. So that's interesting in that. On one hand, I do think that it would be possible, kind of from a Taussigian framework of defacement, to say that this is actually an act of defacement that does justice to the public secret, insofar as if the public secret would be that genocide happened and that the colonizers don't know how to actually acknowledge that, and then to like restitute flowing from that. And that is shown in the fact that they don't even call it the thing it is. But that being aside, because it's a whole other discussion, I just wonder if you could say, do you see in your mind, is there any pathway to actually reveal the public secret in a way that does justice to it? So kind of to how you started, maybe that's a way to thanks.
Well, you had now Mark Miller is he's in a minister of another ministry. Now it changes, not Indigenous services, but Crown Indigenous relationship. And he, a couple of weeks ago, he said that he acknowledged that actually government representatives constantly try to deflect the conversation from the real point, which is to give back the land. That's what he said. And he said, now it's time that we give back that land, and that's it, that we go into the, that we cut the crap and just do what they're asking for, what all those elders are saying. We don't want money, we just want the land. Let's do that. And that was the same week that the RCMP entered Wet'suwet'en territory, arrested the children of the hereditary chiefs, and just for enforcing that injunction that was granted 2 years ago to Coastal GasLink, and an injunction that acknowledged the Wet'suwet'en sovereignty, that said, oh yeah, it's true, there was the Delgamuukw case, they're sovereign on their land, but the Delgamuukw case wasn't complete. It didn't delimit exactly what land it was concerned, and plus Wet'suwet'en law would have to be incorporated in Canadian law to become effective. And the judge, Margaret Church, who gave the injunction, said that, well, in the meanwhile, those are two big constitutional questions for this application. So in the meanwhile, we'll grant Coastal GasLink the right to, and then there's no, the Canadian government and the British Columbia Prime Minister said, well, we can't stop the police, it's not political police. We can't stop them. They're enforcing a court injunction that is, in favor of that Coastal GasLink thing. It's like a natural phenomenon. There's nothing political about it. And that was exactly the same week. So I don't know what Miller meant by giving back the land. I have the impression that it's actually some kind of form where they would give back some kind of autonomy to band councils, actually, because they never deflected from, recognizing just the federally funded band councils as the legitimate authorities, and precisely having this kind of resolution of, okay, now you have you have custody over the land and it's your, you know, and you deface it in such a way that it has indigenous words in it or something. And it comes back to termination policies of the white paper 69 and, you know, municipalization of reserves, overcoming the Indian Act. And that's a complicated thing because the Indian Act is just this racist, horrible thing, you know, it considers indigenous people as, you know, juveniles and all that. But still, it's the only thing that protects them from being just fully incorporated into the body politic, because they are still, you know, there's something separate entities that have to be, you know, that are like kept aside and watched over by the crown, and there's something special that hasn't been absorbed yet. So it's all these cunning ways in which finally the narratives of the land back and restitution seems that it might find some kind of formulation where actually the old dream of Canada of integrating Indigenous peoples and into the body politic and eliminating the Indian problem will actually it'll serve that cause, all that language for sovereignty. Now you're sovereign, you become Canadians. It will be something like that. That's my impression.
Well, fascinating. Thank you. So on that, this has been one of our longest talks. So thank you very much, everyone who's been here virtually and in person. There's a bunch of virtual claps. And just so that people know, personally, it's been a great pleasure to host again, STAND. Thanks everyone who was there for any of the talks this semester. We're going to have another round of talks next semester, starting in the winter. Schedule will be released for that as soon as possible. Right now, we have one completely booked speaker. That's April 8th. Professor Scott Simon from the University of Ottawa will be coming in to present, but there will be more than that and sooner than that. So thanks again, everyone, and have a wonderful, December season. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Cheers.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Merci. Bye.